I woke up before sunrise in a house that never felt like mine. The cold floor touched my feet as I sat up. Another long day, I whispered to myself. I walked into the kitchen. Nadia was already there, busy making tea. She didn't even look at me. "You are late again," she said coldly. "I was studying late," I replied. She laughed. "Studying? Or wasting time? Ollie never wastes time like you." I stayed quiet, but inside I felt the words cut deep. My father entered the room. I looked at him. "Good morning, Dad." He nodded without speaking much. Nadia placed tea in front of Ollie with a smile. "Drink carefully, my son," she said warmly. I watched and said nothing. Later I tried to eat breakfast. Nadia pushed a plate toward me. "Don't sit too long. You have no special place here." Ollie smirked. "He always acts like he belongs." I said, "I never said that." Nadia replied sharply, "Then learn your place." I left the table quietly and went to school. On the way I kept thinking, why am I always wrong in this house? At school I tried to focus. My friend asked, "Are you okay?" I forced a smile. "Yes, I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. Inside everything felt heavy. When I came back home I heard voices from the living room. I stopped outside the door. Nadia was speaking. "He should leave after his studies. He is becoming a burden." My heart stopped. Did she really say that? I whispered. My father replied weakly, "We will see." I stepped back silently. My hands were shaking. So I am just a burden, I thought. I went to my room and sat down. I told myself, don't cry. Don't show weakness. But my eyes burned anyway. I looked at the mirror and said, I will not stay where I am unwanted. Something inside me changed that night. I started thinking about my future outside this house. Later that night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Nadia's words again and again. He should leave after his studies. I whispered into the dark room, where will I go if I leave? I imagined myself alone on the streets, but then I shook my head. No, I must become strong. The next morning I tried to act normal. I entered the kitchen and said, "Good morning." Nadia didn't respond. Ollie laughed softly. "Why are you so polite today?" I said, "Because I don't want trouble." Nadia finally looked at me. "Trouble? You are the trouble." My father sighed. "Enough, Nadia." She turned to him. "You never correct him." I interrupted softly, "I am trying my best." She snapped, "Your best is not enough." I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't answer. At school I sat alone under a tree. My friend came and said, "You look different today." I replied, "Maybe I am just tired of everything." He asked, "Home problems?" I hesitated, then said, "Something like that." He said, "You should talk to your father." I laughed softly. He doesn't listen to me. When I returned home I saw Ollie playing with my old school bag. "Why are you touching my things?" I asked. He said, "It's just a bag." I took it back and said, "Please don't touch my things again." Nadia shouted from the kitchen, "Don't raise your voice at him." I replied, "I was just asking." She walked closer. "You are always complaining." I said quietly, "I just want respect." She said, "Respect is earned." That night I sat outside my room and looked at the sky. I said, "I will earn respect one day even if I have to leave everything behind." My father passed by and looked at me. "Are you okay?" I said, "Do you think I am okay?" He stayed silent. I said, "I just want you to hear me once." He sighed and walked away. I whispered, "Even my father cannot hear me." That was the moment I realized I was truly alone. I stood up and clenched my fists. "This house will not decide my future," I said to myself. "I will build my own life even if no one supports me." I packed my school notes carefully and whispered, "One day I will return here, but not as someone they can ignore." For the first time I felt fear and determination at the same time. I sat on the edge of my bed and thought about everything that had happened today. The house felt colder than ever, but my heart felt different now. I told myself that I would study harder, work smarter, and never depend on their approval again. If I had to leave, I would leave with pride and build my own path. No one in that house would ever decide who I become. I closed my eyes and finally stopped crying for their approval. From now on, I would live for myself only. I whispered that my story was just beginning, not ending, and no matter how many times they tried to break me, I would stand again stronger than before, learning from every insult, every silence, every rejection, turning pain into fuel for my future life outside this house where I was never truly seen or valued. That moment made me decide I will change everything starting tomorrow without looking back again. I woke up before sunrise and stared at the ceiling for a moment. I said quietly, "Another day I don't belong here." Nadia's voice came from the kitchen. "Wake up. Do you think this house runs itself?" I replied, "I'm coming." Ali laughed from the hallway. "He always acts like he owns time." I ignored him and walked out. At the table, Nadia placed food in front of Ali first. "Eat well, my son." I said, "Can I get some tea?" She replied, "Wait. Can't you see I'm busy?" I stayed silent. My father sat down and avoided my eyes. I said, "Good morning." He nodded softly without speaking. Ali said, "He never does anything important." I replied, "I study harder than you think." Nadia snapped, "Studying won't run this house." I lowered my head and kept eating. At school, my friend asked, "Why do you look exhausted?" I said, "I didn't sleep properly." He said, "Still problems at home?" I replied, "Same every day." He said, "You should tell someone." I said, "No one listens anyway." After school, I walked slowly back home. As soon as I entered, Nadia said, "Why are you late again?" I replied, "School finished late." She said, "Always excuses." Ali added, "He is born with excuses." I said, "That's not true." Nadia warned, "Don't talk back." I went to my room and sat quietly. Later I heard voices from the kitchen. Nadia said, "He is useless. He should leave after studies." My hands froze. I whispered, "Again this talk." My father said, "Let's not argue now." Nadia replied, "You always protect him." I closed my eyes tightly. I went outside and sat near the wall in silence. I said to myself, I must stay strong. Sarah from next door called, "Hey, are you okay?" I replied, "I'm fine." She said, "You don't look fine at all." I said, "Just tired from school." She said, "You can talk if you need." I stayed quiet for a moment and said, "Home is stressful." She said, "I understand more than you think." That moment felt different. At night, I opened my diary and wrote, "I cannot live like this forever." Ali shouted, "Where is my charger?" I replied, "I don't know." Nadia said, "Don't answer him like that." I said, "I didn't do anything wrong." She said, "You always say that." I went back to my room. I looked at the ceiling and whispered, "One day I will leave." My father walked past my door but didn't stop. I said softly, "Even he doesn't care." I opened my diary again and wrote, "I will become independent." I said, "No matter how hard it gets." I closed my eyes and promised myself, I will not break. I sat there for a long time thinking about every insult, every silence, every ignored word that had built a wall around my heart, and I realized I could no longer depend on anyone in this house for support or understanding, because every day I was becoming invisible to them while I was still expected to live like nothing was wrong. So I decided I would start saving every bit of energy, every thought, every small opportunity one had to build a future outside this place, even if it meant working alone, studying harder at night, and ignoring their words until I could finally stand on my own feet without needing anyone's approval ever again, and that thought became the only thing keeping me from breaking completely inside. The next morning felt heavier than the last. I sat at the edge of my bed and whispered, I can't keep living like this. In the kitchen, Nadia said, "You forgot to wash your cup again." I replied, "I will do it now." Ali smirked. "He only remembers after getting shouted at." I said, "Stop talking about me like I'm not here." Nadia snapped, "Then act like you matter." I stayed quiet and washed the cup. At school, my friend said, "You are getting more silent every day." I replied, "Maybe silence is safer." He said, "That's not healthy." I said, "Neither is my home." He didn't respond, just looked at me. After school, Sarah met me again near the gate. She said, "You look worse today." I said, "It's nothing new." She said, "You don't have to carry everything alone." I replied, "I always do." She said softly, "That's not how life should be." For a moment I didn't answer. At night I wrote again in my diary, "I will find a way out." I said to myself, even if no one believes in me, I will believe in myself. The house felt silent, but my mind was louder than ever. I lay back on my bed and stared at the dark ceiling, feeling both fear and determination inside me, and I quietly promised myself that tomorrow I would start changing everything step by step, even if it meant facing them all without fear, because I could no longer accept being treated like I didn't exist anymore in this house ever again now. I woke up to shouting outside my room. "Where is my money?" Nadia's voice cut through the house. I opened my door slowly. What's going on? Ali pointed at me immediately. He was in the living room last night. I said, so? Nadia stepped closer. Money is missing from my drawer. I frowned. I didn't take anything. She laughed coldly. Of course you will say that. My father walked in. What is happening here? Nadia said, your son stole my money. I said quickly, I didn't steal anything. Ali added, he was acting strange yesterday. I turned to him. Stop lying. He shrugged. I'm just telling the truth. My father looked at me. Did you go into her room? I said, no, I didn't. Nadia said, then how did money disappear? I replied, ask Ali. He is the one blaming me. Ali said, now he is blaming me. I felt my chest tighten. This is not fair. Nadia raised her voice. Don't talk back. I said, I am telling the truth. My father shouted, enough. The room went silent. Nadia said softly, he is getting worse every day. I looked at my father. You believe her? He avoided my eyes. I said again, I didn't do it. Ali said, he is lying. I felt something break inside me. I shouted, I did not take any money. Everyone froze. I continued, why would I steal? I don't even ask you for anything. Nadia stepped back slightly. My father said, calm down. I laughed bitterly. Calm down? When you all are accusing me? Ali said, see? He is out of control. I pointed at him. You are the one lying. Nadia said, don't point fingers. I said, for once listen to me. Silence again. My father finally said, enough. We will handle this later. I said, no. You already decided I am guilty. No one answered. I walked back a step. My hands were shaking. I said quietly, I understand now. Nadia said, what do you understand? I looked at all of them. That none of you will ever trust me. My father said, don't say that. I replied, it's true. Ali smirked. Finally he admits it. I shook my head. You twisted everything. Nadia said, go to your room. I said, no. Everyone looked shocked. I had never said that before. I said, I will not keep silent anymore. My father said, watch your tone. I said, I have watched my tone my whole life. Nothing changed. Nadia said, ungrateful child. I said, I didn't steal. I didn't lie. But you all treated me like a criminal. Silence filled the room again. I turned away slowly. I said, one day I will leave this house. Nadia laughed. Leave? Where will you go? I replied, anywhere I am respected. My father said nothing. Ali said, good luck surviving. I looked at him. I will survive better than you think. I walked to my room and closed the door. Inside I sat down and breathed heavily. I whispered, something changed today. I opened my diary and wrote, they will never believe me. I paused. Then I wrote, so I will stop trying to make them. I said softly, from now on I live for myself. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing their voices again and again. Nadia, he stole it. Ali, he is lying. My father, silence. I whispered, I am alone. But then something stronger came. I said, if I am alone, I will become strong alone. I closed my eyes and made a decision. I will leave this house one day. And I will prove everything they said about me is wrong. The next morning the house felt different to me. Nadia passed by and said, don't think yesterday changes anything. I replied, it already changed everything for me. She stopped. What does that mean? I said, it means I see things clearly now. Ali laughed from behind her. He thinks he's strong now. I turned to him. No, I am becoming strong. My father looked at me carefully. Don't start new drama. I said, I am not starting anything. I am ending my silence. Nadia said, silence suited you better. I replied, silence only protected you, not me. She had no answer. At school my friend noticed me immediately. Something happened. I said, I stopped pretending today. He asked, what did you do? I replied, I finally spoke the truth even if they didn't accept it. He said, and now? I looked at him. Now I plan my life outside them. He said softly, that sounds serious. I nodded. It is. Later Sarah saw me again near the gate. She said, you look different. I replied, I feel different. She asked, good different or bad different? I said, real different. She looked at me carefully. What happened at home? I hesitated, then said, "They accused me of something I didn't do." She frowned. "That's not fair." I said, "Life there is never fair." She said, "So what will you do?" I looked ahead. "I will leave one day." She said softly, "And until then?" I said, "Until then I prepare." That night I opened my diary again. I wrote, "Today I stopped begging to be believed." I added, "Now I will build a life where I don't need their belief." I closed diary and began my beginning alone. I woke up earlier than usual and checked my small savings notebook under the mattress. "One day closer," I whispered. At home I heard Nadia, "You think working part-time makes you important?" I replied, "It helps me pay for my studies." Ali laughed, "He thinks he is independent now." I ignored him. At my new job I entered the office and Omar greeted me. "Hey, you made it early again." I said, "I don't want to be late." He smiled, "Boss likes that." Mr. Khan called me, "You are improving." I said, "I am trying my best, sir." He said, "Keep this dedication and you will go far." I nodded, "I won't waste this chance." Omar said, "You learn fast." I replied, "I have to." At home Nadia said, "Where are you going every day?" I said, "Work and study." She said, "Hiding something?" I said, "No." My father said nothing. Ali said, "He is definitely hiding something." I stayed silent. At night I counted money quietly. "Still not enough," I said. I heard Nadia outside, "He is becoming distant." My father, silence. I wrote in diary, "I will leave soon." Omar at work said, "Want help with Excel?" I said, "Yes, teach me." He said, "You are serious about this?" I replied, "I have no other option." Mr. Khan said, "You remind me of myself when I was young." I said, "I don't want to fail like before." He smiled, "You won't if you keep this focus." At home things worsened. Nadia said, "You don't even sit with us anymore." I said, "I am busy." Ali said, "Too busy for family?" I replied, "This house doesn't feel like family." Silence. My father said, "Don't speak like that." I said, "Truth hurts." At work Omar said, "Why so quiet today?" I said, "Home problems." He said, "You need balance." I said, "I need escape." He looked serious. Mr. Khan overheard, "Escape?" I said, "Better future." He said, "Then earn it." I said, "I will." At night I saved money in a hidden box. I whispered, "Step by step." Nadia shouted, "Come eat." I said, "Not hungry." Ali said, "He thinks he is above food now." I ignored him. I said to myself, "I will not break again." Omar said, "You changed." I said, "I had to." Mr. Khan said, "Good employees think like that." I said, "I am not staying here forever." He said, "Then plan carefully." I nodded. I said, "My future starts now." I started staying longer at the office to learn more. Omar said, "You don't have to push yourself this hard every day." I replied, "If I stop now I will stay stuck forever." He nodded, "You think a lot about escaping your home." I said, "It doesn't feel like home anymore." Mr. Khan walked by and said, "Hard work is good but don't burn yourself out." I said, "I can handle it, sir." He replied, "I see discipline but also pressure." I stayed quiet. At home Nadia said, "You look tired all the time now." I replied, "Work is demanding." Ali said, "Or maybe he is doing something suspicious." I said, "Stop guessing things about me." My father finally said, "Don't argue." I said softly, "I am not arguing, I am just living." At night I added more money to my hidden savings box and whispered, "Slowly I will reach my goal." Omar said next day, "We are going out for lunch, join us." I said, "I can't spend extra money." He laughed, "It's on me." I said, "Then I will come." He smiled, "Good, you need breaks too." Mr. Khan said later, "You are becoming one of my reliable workers." I said, "I want to become more than that." He asked, "Like what?" I said, "Independent." He nodded, "Then keep going." At home I heard Nadia say, "He is changing too much." Ali said, "He thinks he is better than us." I said quietly, "I am just trying to survive." That night I looked at the mirror and said, "I am not the same person anymore." I closed my diary and said, "My future is bigger than this house." I began planning every detail of my exit carefully, writing expenses in my notebook and thinking about rent and food. Omar said, "You are always writing something." I replied, planning my future. He smiled, that sounds serious again. I said, it has to be. Mr. Khan called me and said, you are ready for more responsibility. I said, I will not waste it. At home Nadia said, you are never present anymore. I said, I am preparing for something bigger. Ali laughed, big dreams from a nobody. I looked at him and said, watch me. My father stayed silent again. That silence no longer hurt like before. I told myself, I will leave, I will succeed, I will prove everything without saying another word to them again. I closed my diary that night and felt no fear, only direction. I knew my new world outside would begin soon and I would never look back again. I woke up that morning with one clear thought in my mind, I will leave this house soon. I said to myself, today I will tell someone. At work I saw Maureen first. She smiled and said, you look serious today. Everything okay? I replied, I think I am going to move out. She stopped. Really? Are you sure? I said, yes. I cannot stay there anymore. She nodded slowly. Then you need to plan carefully. I can help if you need support. I said, I just need someone to believe I can do it. She replied, I believe you. That simple sentence stayed in my mind all day. Later, I met Sarah near the gate after work. She asked, you look different again. What happened? I said, I made a decision. She said, what kind of decision? I took a breath and said, I am leaving my house. Her eyes widened. Are you serious? I said, yes. I cannot live like that anymore. She replied softly, where will you go? I said, I found a small room near my office. She said, are you sure it is safe? I said, it is not perfect but it is mine. She looked at me and said, I am proud of you. Those words almost broke me. At home that night, Nadia was waiting for me. She said, where were you? I replied, work. Ali laughed, or planning another secret life? I ignored him. Nadia said, you are becoming strange these days. I said, I am just busy. She stepped closer and said, busy or disobedient? I said, I am not here to argue. She said loudly, you think you can survive alone? I replied, I will try. My father was sitting silently. Nadia said, look at him. He thinks he is grown now. Ali said, he will fail outside in 1 week. I looked at both of them and said, maybe I will. But I still have to try. Nadia laughed, you will come crawling back. I said, no. I am leaving for good. My father finally looked at me but said nothing. That silence hurt more than anything. I went to my room and started packing slowly. I said to myself, this is really happening. I folded my clothes carefully. I heard Nadia outside saying, he is making a mistake. Ali said, let him go. He will come back crying. I kept packing. I whispered, I will not come back the same. Sarah texted me, are you okay? I replied, I am scared but ready. She said, that is normal. Stay strong. I said, I will. The next morning I carried my bag outside. Nadia said, so you are really leaving? I said, yes. She said, you will regret this. I replied, no. I will regret staying. Ali said, good luck surviving. I looked at him and said, I will survive better than you think. My father stood near the door. I said, Dad? He looked at me. I waited for him to say something, anything. But he stayed silent. I nodded slowly. I said, I understand. I walked out of the house for the first time with my own decision. Outside the air felt different. I said to myself, I am free even if it hurts. Sarah met me outside and said, you did it. I replied, I finally did. She smiled, this is your new beginning. I said, yes. No going back now. Maureen called me and said, be careful and stay focused. I said, I will not waste this chance. As I walked away I looked back once. I said quietly, this is not my home anymore. Then I turned forward and said, my life starts now. I woke up on a thin mattress and stared at the ceiling. I said, this is my life now. My phone buzzed. Omar texted, you coming today? I replied, yes, I'm on my way. At work, Omar looked at me and said, you look tired again. I said, sleeping is still difficult. He nodded. Living alone isn't easy, huh? I replied, I thought it would be freedom. It's harder than I expected. He said, but you're still here. That means you're strong. I said quietly, I don't feel strong. He smiled, strength isn't a feeling. Mr. Khan called me later. Come here. I walked in and said, yes, sir? He said, you've been consistent. I replied, I'm trying my best. He said, that's why I'm increasing your responsibilities. I blinked. Me? He nodded. You're honest? That matters more than experience sometimes. I said, I won't disappoint you. He said, I know. That moment felt strange, like someone finally saw me. After work, Omar said, let's grab something cheap to eat. I said, I need to save money. He said, you can't survive on air, man. I replied, I'm learning how to survive on less. He looked at me. You're still thinking like you're running from something. I said softly, I am. That night I counted my money again. I whispered, it's not enough. My phone rang. Sir. She said, how are you holding up? I said, tired. But okay. She replied, you sound different now. I said, I live differently now. She asked, do you miss home? I paused. Not the way it was. She said softly, that sounds painful. I replied, it is, but necessary. The next day Omar said, there's a better position opening. I said, do I qualify? He smiled, you already do. Just need confidence. I said, confidence doesn't come easily. He replied, it comes with proof. Later Mr. Khan called me again. He said, I heard you've been helping others without being asked. I said, it's just work. He shook his head. It's character. I stayed quiet. He said, I'm promoting you to assistant supervisor. I froze. Sir, are you serious? He nodded. You earned it. I said, thank you. I won't waste it. Walking out, Omar said, see? I told you. I said, I didn't expect it this soon. He laughed, life doesn't wait for expectations. At night I sat alone in my room. I said, I'm moving forward. But silence answered me. I heard a notification. It was a message from an unknown number. It was Ollie. You think you're big now? I stared at it. I didn't reply. Another message came, Dad is sick. Mom is stressed. Happy now. My chest tightened. I whispered, why are you telling me this? I typed but stopped. I deleted everything. I said, this is not my responsibility anymore. Still, it didn't feel easy. Sarah called again. She said, you sound disturbed. I said, I heard from home. She asked, do you want to go back? I said quickly, no. Then softer, but it still hurts. She said, that's normal. Healing takes time. I replied, I thought I was past it. She said, you're just starting. The next morning at work, Omar said, you seem quiet. I said, family stuff. He nodded. Still affecting you? I said, I thought distance would fix everything. He said, distance only helps breathing, not healing. Mr. Khan overheard and said, problems don't disappear. You just learn to walk with them. I said, I'm trying to walk. He said, then don't stop. Days passed. Omar said, you're improving fast. I replied, I have to. He asked, still no contact with home? I said, minimal. He said, that must be hard. I said, it is, but necessary. One evening I got another message from Sarah. Stay strong. Don't go back out of guilt. I replied, I won't. But I stared at it for a long time. At night I whispered, why does freedom still feel heavy? No answer came. Only silence, and my own breathing. I lay back and said, I'm not running anymore. Then I corrected myself, I'm building. And for the first time I believed that maybe survival was not the end, but the beginning of something I hadn't reached yet. I woke up to a message from Sarah. She wrote, have you heard anything from home? I replied, no. Why? She responded quickly, things are getting bad there. I stared at the screen and said, what kind of bad? A few minutes later she called. She said, Ollie got into serious trouble at school. I said, what happened? She replied, he's failing, skipping classes and fighting. I stayed silent for a moment. Then I said, and Nadia? She said, she's trying to fix everything but she looks exhausted. I whispered, so things are falling apart. She said softly, not everything. But the balance is gone. I replied, and now they remember I existed. She paused. Your father asked about you. I said, really? She said, yes. He looked confused, like he finally noticed something missing. I didn't know what to say. I only said, I see. At work, Omar noticed my silence. He said, "You're thinking about home again." I replied, "It's hard not to." He said, "Do you want to go back?" I said quickly, "No." Then softer, "I just didn't expect this." He said, "Truth usually shows up late." Mr. Khan called me in. He said, "You seem distracted." I said, "Just personal things." He nodded. "As long as your work stays solid." I said, "It will." He said, "Good. Because you're becoming important here." I replied, "I just want stability." He said, "Then keep moving forward." Later, Maureen came to my desk. She said, "I heard about your family." I looked at her. News travels fast. She said, "Are you okay?" I replied, "I don't know yet." She said, "Don't let guilt pull you back." I said, "It's not guilt. It's confusion." She nodded. "That's worse." I asked, "What would you do?" She said, "I would choose peace over history." That line stayed in my mind. At night, Sarah called again. She said, "Your father asked about your job." I said, "Why now?" She replied, "Because he's realizing how much you actually handled." I laughed softly. "Funny. I was invisible until I left." She said, "That's usually how it works." I asked, "Do they blame me less now?" She hesitated. "They don't know what to blame anymore." I stayed quiet. She said softly, "Things changed because you left." I replied, "Or maybe because I stopped being their excuse." She didn't respond immediately. Then she said, "Maybe both." The next day at work, Omar said, "You look calmer today." I said, "I stopped expecting answers." He smiled. "That helps." I said, "Not really. It just hurts less." He nodded. "That's still progress." Later, Maureen came again. She said, "Ollie got suspended." I said, "Again?" She nodded. "Nadia is struggling to manage everything." I said, "I never wanted that." She replied, "You didn't cause it either." I said quietly, "But I was blamed for everything for years." She said, "And now the truth is correcting itself." I asked, "But why does it feel empty?" She said, "Because you're still healing." At night, I got another message from Nadia. It said, "Please come back. Your father is not well." I stared at it for a long time. Omar's words echoed in my mind, "Don't go back to what broke you." I didn't reply. Instead, I wrote in my notebook, "I will not return to pain disguised as family." Sarah called again. She said, "They really want you back." I replied, "Wanting me back and needing me back are not the same." She said softly, "What will you do?" I said, "I will keep moving forward." She asked, "Not even to visit?" I paused. Then I said, "Not yet." She said, "That's fair." The next morning, Mr. Khan called me again. He said, "You handled the last project well." I said, "Thank you, sir." He added, "You're no longer just an employee. You're part of the structure now." I said, "I never expected that." He replied, "Most people don't until they earn it." At lunch, Omar said, "Your story sounds complicated." I said, "It's not complicated. It's just unfinished." He asked, "Do you miss them?" I thought for a moment. Then I said, "I miss what I thought they were." He nodded slowly. That night, Maureen texted, "Don't let the past negotiate your future." I replied, "It already lost that right." I sat on my bed and said, "I am not going back." But somewhere inside, I felt the weight of everything I left behind still breathing. And I realized moving forward wasn't forgetting, it was choosing not to be pulled back into something that had already broken me once before. I woke up early and stared at my phone for a moment. I said, "Another day, another version of me." At work, Omar greeted me with a smile. "You're early again." I replied, "I don't like wasting time anymore." He laughed, "That sounds like the new you." I said, "I guess I changed without noticing." Mr. Khan called me into his office. He said, "Sit down." I replied, "Yes, sir." He looked at my file and said, "You've done well." "Very well." I said, "I just followed instructions." He shook his head. "No. You led yourself here." I stayed quiet. Then he said, "I'm offering you a full-time promotion with higher responsibility." I blinked. "Sir, are you serious?" He nodded. "Completely." He sighed, "I accept." "Thank you." He smiled. "You earned it." Outside, Omar clapped me on the shoulder. "Told you, man." I said, "It still doesn't feel real." He replied, "Get used to it. This is just the start." At lunch, Maureen joined us. She said, we should celebrate this properly. I said, maybe later. I still feel strange about it. She smiled, that's called growth. I said, or fear. She said, same thing sometimes. That night I sat in my room and checked my phone. A message appeared from an unknown number. It was my father. I miss you. I froze. I whispered, after everything, now? Omar's words echoed in my mind, don't let the past pull you back. I didn't reply. Instead I placed the phone down. Sarah called soon after. She said, you saw it, didn't you? I replied, yes. She asked, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know yet. She said softly, you don't owe them your silence anymore. I said, I know. But I also don't owe them revenge. She replied, so what do you owe yourself? I thought for a moment. Then I said, peace. The next day Mr. Khan called me again. He said, you've become one of my most reliable people. I replied, I never expected that from myself. He said, most people don't until they grow into it. At work, Omar said, you look lighter today. I said, I made a decision last night. He asked, about home. I nodded. I'm not going back. He said, not even to fix things? I said, some things are not meant to be fixed, only accepted. He stayed quiet for a moment. Then he said, that sounds final. I replied, it is. Maureen later said, did you respond to your father? I said, no. She asked, why not? I said, because I would lose myself again in the process. She nodded slowly. That's honesty. I said, it's survival. Days passed. Work got busier but I handled it better than before. Omar said, you've changed completely. I replied, I had to. He asked, do you ever feel angry anymore? I thought for a moment. Then I said, not anger. Just distance. He said, that's dangerous. I replied, so was staying. At night I finally opened my father's message again. I miss you. I typed a reply. Then stopped. I deleted it. I said quietly, missing me is not the same as understanding me. Sarah called again. She said, you're quiet tonight. I said, I'm thinking. She asked, about going back? I said, no. About moving forward without looking behind. She said softly, that sounds like freedom. I replied, it feels like rebuilding. The next morning Mr. Khan said, you should consider management training next. I said, I'm ready. He smiled. That's new. I said, so am I. At lunch Omar said, what's your end goal now? I looked at him and said, to never feel powerless again. He nodded. Fair. Maureen said, and your family? I paused. Then I said, they are part of my past, not my path. She said softly, that's powerful. I replied, that's necessary. That night I stood outside my small room and looked at the sky. I said, I survived what was meant to break me. My phone buzzed again. Same message. I miss you. I didn't answer. Instead I said, I forgive you. Then I added, but I am not returning. I closed my eyes and felt something finally settle inside me. Not pain. Not anger. Just clarity. And for the first time in my life I stood alone without feeling lost, because I had built myself from everything that once tried to destroy me, and I finally understood that freedom was not leaving a place, but never letting it live inside me again.